Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Tech Leaders Launchpad live stream. If this is your first time, hi, I'm Andrew Murphy. I'm the founder of Tech Leaders Launchpad, and I've been in the tech industry since about the early 2000s. And I got into leadership early, way too early. And one of the problems back then was there wasn't a large number of resources to help you out to understand what it means to be a tech leader. I was promoted before I was ready, as is a common story with many people in the industry. And so now what I do is I help people understand the role of technology leadership. And one of the ways I do that is through these live streams. I share the people that are my mentors, the people that I learn from, the people who I gain a lot of information and a lot of help from around the industry, and I share them with you folks to hopefully help you as well. And with me today is one of those, Dave Kuhn. Welcome to the live stream.
Hi. How you going, Andrew? Thanks for having me.
You're more than welcome. More than welcome. I've been looking forward to this for a while. Unfortunately, we try and do these regularly every month, but with what was going on in my personal life, with welcoming the second baby to our household in April, unfortunately we weren't able to do April, but we're here in May. We've managed to do May, so I'm super looking forward to this.
Congratulations, and I'm glad we were able to make this happen.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So I often start the live stream with a little bit of an icebreaker just to get us talking and to get people talking in the chat. And the question that I like to ask is, what's your favorite tech gadget that isn't your computer? So you're not allowed to use your computer or your smartphone or your tablet. It's got to be something that is techie, for some definition of techie, that isn't a computing device.
Well, I think this has some relevance in what you just said there about having welcomed a new family member. And I used to play a lot of guitar before I had kids. And it's just really hard once you've got kids sleeping, and especially if you've got, if you're into electric guitar. It used to be your only option was you had an amp, and it sounded terrible if it was anything below 11. And so, a USB audio interface is my favorite bit of tech, because it means that I can plug that into my computer. I can, whack on the cans at night and, sort of pick this thing up behind me, so a 7-string guitar, and and just jam out, and you get all sorts of effects and stuff that you can put through. You sound like you're actually there. You can run it as loud as you want, and nobody cares, and you're not waking anybody up. So that's been a game changer. Big one for
so cool. That's so cool. I love that. I'd never even thought about that as a concept, because you think about musical instruments as making sound.
Yes.
And to kind of play a musical instrument and it not make sound, that's a great kind of life improvement. I had a good friend who whenever he looked at buying a house or renting a house, he was really into drums, and he would try and make sure that he had like 2 rooms between his place he was going to have drums and the next door neighbors, so that the sound didn't travel between it. And this used to cause him incredible problems in choosing a place to live. And then electric drum kits were invented, and he could play drums with his headphones on and nobody could hear anything apart from him. It was like massive.
Yeah.
That's so cool. That's so cool. Yeah. So my favorite one this week is these things. So I just got these a couple of days ago. What they are, they were recommended by another guest on my live stream, but they're effectively a pair of glasses that has a screen built into them and a USB-C interface. So any device that supports USB-C DisplayPort alt mode, so smartphones, tablets, computers, you can plug them in and you can see the screen on this. And the basic idea behind it is I do a lot of international travel, less so this year because of new baby, but I still do a lot of international travel. And rather than having my neck craning down looking at an iPad or looking at the crappy computer screen, in the chair behind me, I can literally pop these on, relax in my chair, and see a 120-inch screen directly in front of me.
I think also, like, just not just for international flying, but you constantly, like, even on the planes where they've done away with the screens and they've got the holders for for your iPad or your phone or whatever, they're constantly asking you to take it out of there because it's like
Yeah.
meal service, or it's like takeoff and landing, and it's like, what's the point of that?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Meals as well. This didn't even occur to me, but the last time I was flying, I used my iPad as my entertainment device, and it wasn't on one of those that had a place for the iPad. And when you get your meals, it was really awkward to
You
where do
basically
you
got
put
to
your
put it away or try and perch it awkwardly there and hope it doesn't fall into your neighbor's orange juice.
Yeah, so I'm hoping I'm flying to Oslo on Friday to run a workshop next week, and I'm hoping that this is going to be a massive game changer. So I'll
You got to
definitely
tell me
let
how they
you.
work out. I reckon I
Yeah,
could grab those.
I'll definitely let you know, Dave, and I'll report back on the next live stream if anybody else is interested.
Amazing.
So I'll let you know. So we've got Bradley saying, looking forward to Dave's insights. Thank you, Bradley. We're definitely looking forward
That's
to
a
them
mate
as
of mine.
well.
G'day, Brad. Good to see
If
you,
you've
mate.
got any questions for Dave, please feel free to post them. Patrick talking about his favorite technology device, watch. Yeah, I'm guessing some kind of smartwatch. Is that Patrick, or is that a kind
Something
of old?
looks like a graphic.
Yeah, Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah. And then you're very indecisive because you also said earpods.
Uh,
I think we're only going to let you have one, Patrick. You've got to decide. Cool. All right. So I normally start these with kind of asking you to introduce yourself a little bit, but also talk about. We've chosen this topic of scaling yourself as a CTO, and before we do these live streams, the guest and I have a conversation about what topic is going to be something that they care about a lot and something that they think they've got a unique, interesting and compelling perspective on in order to share with the folks watching. And this was the topic that we decided on, Dave. So why don't you, just by way of introducing yourself a little bit, come around to why this topic is important to you.
Yeah, cheers. Look, actually, I found myself resonating a lot with what you said, in the opening. Like a lot of people, promoted into a position earlier than perhaps I was ready for, and not knowing what I needed to know to be effective at the role. And yeah, I think over time, what I've realized is that um, there is, an element to on-the-job training, and you can pick it up, but geez, it's the harder way to just do everything on the job. So a bit of my background is that I started out as a software engineer. I started doing a master's of business and IT, sort of like an MBA, but with like a bit of technology stuff tacked on. But I dropped out because my startup got funded, and I got 2 years through it, had 1 year to go, and my startup got funded, and I went to Silicon Valley instead, which I think is probably par for the course for a lot of people there. They've dropped out of
Yep.
some kind of university education thing. Founded a bunch of different startups. I think I've been doing startups since before I even knew that startups were a thing. So I had like a security hardware startup thing that was doing like Wi-Fi and solar powered security cameras for construction sites back in like 2003. Wi-Fi was barely a thing back then. But since then, I had in 2011, my company was part of the first batch at StartMate in 2011, so the first ever. And then we went to the States, and we were accepted into 500 startups. Missed out on YC at the final stage, but did get to have lunch with Sam Altman, which was kind of interesting. Had no idea who was going to do what he was going to do. And then, founded a superannuation company called Spaceship, and that was sold to eToro last year. Since then, I've been involved and worked with over 20 different startups and scale-ups as a fractional CTO. Kind of got into that thinking like, I don't know what I'm going to do for my next startup, so the next best thing I can do is apply my skills to help others in the ecosystem. I'm really passionate about the Aussie startup ecosystem. I think this is the best place to live. And having tried to run a startup over in Silicon Valley, look, it's great, and I highly recommend a visit and see what that's all about at some point in your life if you're sort of in this. But I could say I would much prefer to do that here. Australia is just a great place, and there's so much that I think we take for granted if we haven't traveled elsewhere in the world. And so I want this to be a great place to do that, and I want there to be depth in the industry, and I want to see a big part of that is startups thriving, and not just surviving but thriving and making it onto a global stage, which also implies scale. I've done this across a bunch of different industries. Almost everything you can mention: fintech, medtech, energy, envirotech, edtech, HR. I've worked with businesses like the CSIRO, Zip, Future Super, Propeller Aero, which is a local drone company that's done really well. The list goes on. But I love getting in and learning how their businesses work and how tech applies to that business, and then looking at how do we make that start to tech. How do we make that not be a bottleneck to their success? How do we make that the secret to their success? Which I think is, if we're talking about a tech startup, that is the engine room. So, yeah.
Yeah. And, there's a big tendency, especially if there's, non-technical founders, to kind of look at tech as a cost center to be minimized than a value center to be maximized. And I think, that's a mindset that is thankfully shifting and has shifted over the past kind of decade. But there's still a lot of people who have maybe come from the corporate world to start a startup and then, are kind of viewing tech from the wrong angle effectively.
Yeah, and I think we're going to touch on some of that today, like some of the reasons why that still persists. And I think there are solutions to that. And it is very much an essential part of a business being able to thrive and to grow without tech being an anchor. The CTO plays a massive part in that.
They do, and we've talked on this live stream with a few people at Charity Majors about how your role as a technology executive is to kind of live in the dichotomy of two teams. The team of technology, but also the team of the other executives. And it's hard often to juggle the balancing act between what's in the best interest of the technology team in the short term versus what's in the best interest of the business for the long term. That's a hard thing for an executive to do. So we called this live stream "Scaling Yourself as a CTO." Let's just start off with what does that mean? What does scale mean as a CTO?
Yeah, it was something that I always like. There's that saying that the test of how well you know something is to try and teach it, and I think trying to explain what you actually mean when you bring up a concept that seems pretty fundamental. To me, scaling yourself as a CTO is kind of being able to go from that. You started out a business, clean sheet of paper, and initially your CTO is just a programmer. You're an individual contributor. You might be a very good one, a very effective one, a very fast one. And you without too much additional help, maybe on your own, maybe with just a couple of others, are able to get something to market that starts to get used and allows the business to grow to the next stage, sort of past the MVP. And as time goes on, you start to build the team out. And I think most CTOs that I meet have had some kind of leadership experience. Like they're kind of at either a senior engineer who's mentored younger developers, or they've they're a tech lead and they've got some experience designing systems and maybe managing a small team. But few that I meet have actually gone past that stage. And I think this is where we really start to hit, some interesting barriers. It's like you go past the 7 people in a team, which is kind of like the golden ratio, I guess, for managing teams. Any more than that, it starts to be difficult to sort of give everyone the attention that they need to do their best work. And so you find yourself now with splitting teams, and then you sort of fast forward along a bit more, and then you're managing managers, which is kind of a bit like a Rube Goldberg machine, you know, where like you do one thing over here and then it causes something magically to happen over there, and learning how to do that thing in between. And then as the layers add up, it gets even more complicated. And I think what I mean when I say scaling yourself is it's not just the technology that balloons out there, it's the exponential complexity of the relationships and the interactions between all of the people that you are looking after that make this thing happen. And all of that has to grow at the same time. And that's not the only dynamic. At the same time as your team is growing, your peer group at an executive level is growing, and you might even be adding, you know, a board that has, a bunch of its own interesting dynamics and relationships. And all of that's new territory if you go back to the person who was maybe an IC or a tech lead. None of that came out of the box, and all of those things are distinct skills. And I think it's oftentimes in that transition between those stages where we see CTOs most at risk of failing at the mission, or developing habits that will cause them problems further down the track, if not immediately. And all of that, I think, is going to be detrimental to a tech startup, because this is the engine room. This is the value in the business. So I think it's important to get that right. And yeah, I guess that's what I mean when I say, how do you scale yourself as a CTO? How do we go from, nothing to something, and then something bigger again?
Yeah, there's an image that I'm just gonna bring up on the screen, which is my favorite way of kind of visualizing what you're just talking about there, which is this. So, if we think about the dots in this picture as human beings, and the lines as lines of communication, ways in which people can talk to each other, or decision points, things that need to be factored into decisions. When you've got three people in a team, there's only three lines of communication between them, but that grows exponentially. When you've got four people, there's not four lines, there's 6 lines. And 5 people, there's 10 lines. 6 people, there's 15 lines. And by the time you're getting up to the sort of 7 people in a team, there's 21 possible ways in which those people could talk to each other. And that means that the ways you have of communicating and doing process when you've got a small team just fundamentally don't work with a larger team. You just can't do that. And this is also fractal, in the sense of, like you said, when you go into that transition of leader of leaders, the dots in this diagram don't become people anymore, they become teams. And you get the same effect.
Yeah, it's a bit like finding out, like when you look at the night sky, that some of the things that you thought were stars are actually galaxies if you look at them under the through a telescope. Yeah, I love this visualization. I might have to steal that, because this is often what I'm trying to get across to people is, like, you don't realize just how much complexity there is in this. And it is, there is the potential for, like, chaos theory is a thing. And the fact that you could have a conversation with someone, and that could then, in your team of 7 people, that then ripples out and affects, the other people in your team, in subtly different ways, if they talk about it, like, and all the sort of reflective things that happen as a result of that, you just can't predict that. So you need to have, a lot of skill, and it helps if you don't have to learn all of that from scratch through experience
and through trial and error. Like, this is exactly. This is the thing. Like, the computers, when you're an engineer, a computer doesn't care that the code you've written fails the unit test 100 times. You can just keep trying and trying and trying. But you can bet that as a leader, the mistakes you make have a much bigger consequence, because they're affecting the humans in your team. And so,
Totally. I mean, I'm reminded of something that I heard a manager say once, which was like, people don't quit the company, they quit their boss, because you are the manifestation of the company to them. You might as well be. So, your actions really matter, and you can lose good people. Yeah, like you said, if you just keep bashing through things and being heedless of that dynamic, people are a bit more fragile in that way.
Yeah. Welcome, Amy. Anne-Marie. Welcome, Willow. Please, if you've got any questions for Dave, put them in. There will be a Q&A at the end. I really like the that Rube Goldberg analogy you used, because I think it's a really great explanation of what it's like to lead at scale. Because when you're an engineer, say a junior engineer, you get happy if your code even compiles and runs, and so the feedback loop between the action you take and the feedback you get from that is really super tight, and the ambiguity of success is really low. And then you become a senior engineer, and you don't just care about, does my code work? It's, does my code work at scale? And the feedback loop is longer, and the ambiguity of success is higher. And this just keeps going and going as you go into leadership. And I think your Rube Goldberg example analogy is perfect there, because you've kind of got to set the machine up for success, because you can't be there at every point in the machine making sure that every little bit works perfectly. You've kind of got to take a more holistic view. Is that one of the common mistakes you kind of see CTOs make as they scale? They're either kind of completely hands off the Rube Goldberg machine, or they're in there as it's running, kind of tweaking everything. Is that a common mistake?
Yeah, I definitely say the latter picture is the one I see. More often I see the exhausted CTO who's trying to be everywhere at once, trying to fix all the things, plug all the holes, that sort of thing. And I think what happens is, and I'm generalizing here, but you have somebody who's used to putting in controls, and we're used to writing unit tests and adding things to diagnostics and monitoring to our code and all the rest of it. And so we start to try and do that stuff, but it's all still very command and control. And I think everyone's used to like deterministic, but humans are frustratingly non-deterministic, which is actually a feature. It's not a bug. But what it means is, and this actually probably has relevance, if I'd said this even 6 months ago, probably people might have thought, what am I talking about? But like autonomous agents, I often talk about, and because I am an engineer at heart, like I like to think about things like they are systems, and I like to think about like people, like how do you program people? Like, you've got software, well, here's wetware. And really what I figured out early on was that I need to think about this like I've got a distributed system. And every person is their own like autonomous agent or microservice or something like that. And the only way that I'm really going to be able to manage all of this complexity without trying to control everything is I kind of have to give them the framework through which to make their own decisions well. And I think this ties in really well when you understand or think about it as if you put yourself in the shoes of an IC, and most people can because you've been there, you don't show up to work going, geez, I wonder how to do a crap job today. You show up and you're like, even if you don't consciously think it anymore, you still want to do a good job. You still want to do something that you can be proud of. The problem is that we often show up into a workplace that isn't telling us the framework within which we can be successful. And usually, I would say, like an underdeveloped leader, the approach then is to become really prescriptive. I must tell them everything. I must lay out every detail for them. And that's really not appreciating. Like, you pay a lot of money for a bunch of smart people. Like, generally within engineering teams, you need to be pretty smart to be doing this job. So it's not a question of like whether or not you have the cognitive ability or the team, has the desire to do their job well. It's usually more, we haven't told them how to be successful at their job and how to use their own initiative to make good decisions that benefit the team. And this like links into a wanky management business, sorry if I can use that word, that we call alignment. And all that really means is I need to spend time talking to my leaders and the business as a whole about broadly where the business needs to go. So strategy and all of these sort of high level things aren't just for CEOs. What you need to do, if you're not, if you're not intimately involved with like setting the initial strategy, it depends on the business. But one of your fundamental jobs is you need to be able to interpret what that business strategy is and contextualize it. So put it into a shape that can be understood by your audience, which is your team or teams. And once you say to them, look, it's really important, we all know that there's a bunch of fun things that we get to work on, where we're going to get to finally rewrite that particular system, so that it can scale and all the rest of it. But in order for us to get there and do that, it's really important that the business makes progress in this area, goes from X to Y within this time frame. And these are the things that we think are going to get us there. I want you to be completely focused on, for the next while, in all of your meetings and all of your design sessions, ask yourself the question, does it help us get to this sooner or not? And that's how you make the decision. And I think when you communicate like that to people, they're suddenly free of like thinking like, what's the exact way that I need to do this in order to like gain your approval, to, oh, you've told me what the success criteria is. Let's all get together and think about what's the best way to do that. And I think that's an underappreciated thing. So if you see in your business that the leader is like, your CTO or your VP engineering or whatever, is really struggling, they're putting all their fingers in the dikes and all the rest of it, trying to stop everything, and there's a high degree of control, it's probably worth thinking to yourself, well, are we communicating that the overarching concepts, the sort of the what and not the how effectively?
Yeah, it's the balance between breadth and depth, and the higher up you go in an organization, the kind of broader awareness you have, and you have to sacrifice some of that depth. But then we forget that the people who have the depth, that are kind of doing the day work of building and crafting and architecting and perfecting the product, lack some of that breadth. And it's not because they're not smart enough to understand it. It's just the human brain can't cope with having a full breadth and depth picture, and there isn't enough time in the work week for people to gain all of that breadth and depth. So the job of a leader is to take that breadth and kind of distill it and contextualize it and deliver it to the people that have the depth.
That's right. And there's another saying which is like, nature abhors a vacuum. And when you don't provide that input to people, they make up their own rationale and reasons for doing what they do. And another common symptom that I see in teams is you see frustrated CTOs, or if it's really bad, it gets to the CEO. They're like, can't these people understand? We need to head here, and yet they seem to be concerned with like, they want to microservice everything or rebuild everything, replatform everything on Kubernetes or whatever. And like often you find, well, they've just invented a purpose because you haven't given them one.
Yeah. This is a really great point. It's a good segue. I think, you know, we're doing some great discussions here on like general awareness of the problems. One of the things I'm really keen on getting out of these live streams is things people can do tomorrow. You know, things that are super actionable. And one of the first things I'm thinking of is what are the things that, you know, if I was a CTO at a startup that was going through scale and I was trying to scale myself, what are the things that I can notice about myself, my behaviors, my teams and their behaviors that would give me an indication that things are not heading down the right pathway, and I need to kind of stop, reassess, and change the way that I'm behaving as a CTO?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think something I'd be noticing is if you're feeling like everything's coming at you too quickly. So if you constantly are showing up and feeling like things are happening at a rate that are faster than you're out ahead of, and this requires a degree of intellectual honesty with yourself, but if you're constantly feeling behind the eight ball, it means that you aren't on top of it, you're not coping. And I think the reaction to this, and probably, you know, if you're looking for evidence that this might be something for you, you're probably thinking, I'm just going to work longer, I'm going to work harder. I just need to get past this next couple of things and then everything will be fine. No, it won't be fine. In fact, if your startup's doing well, it's just going to get worse. And so it can seem like a really hard thing to do, but I actually would say to you, you need to step back and take a look at the bigger picture, and gain some visual distance to what you're doing. I'm almost certain that if you're feeling like that, you haven't done adequate planning, and there are a lot of things on your backlog in your roadmap that potentially don't need doing or aren't aligned with the strategy. And you could draw a line through it tomorrow. It might be painful from a sunk cost perspective, but you would instantly free yourself of having to be, you know, worried about those things. I think also gaining perspective is a very important thing, because I also think something else to be a check on is when you're talking to your co-founders or, you know, the executive team, or, you know, are you even getting invited into chat in the board meetings? I think oftentimes tech leaders, despite their importance to the business, get sidelined out of those conversations. If you're feeling like you're on the outer, or like you're not trusted to be part of those conversations, or people have this perception, you might have even heard your co-founders say stuff like, oh, look, we don't want to bother you with that. Like, we just want you to focus on X. That sort of shielding, I think that's perfectly reasonable for a manager to do for their team, but it's not for an executive. Executives need to front up, and let's be honest, that's what you are. Once you're approaching a certain level of scale, you need to start thinking it like you're an executive. And executives don't get to make excuses. They don't get to have people shield them. They've just got to get on with it and, you know, account for their own stuff. And I think this is probably a symptom that you're too focused on the details, and that you are not investing in learning how to communicate your requirements up and across to your peers and to the board, so that they understand that they have a job to do in order to support the work that you're doing. And that's, you know, another really common thing I see is like CTOs under pressure. They think the job is like, let's just get in, stick my head down and, like, you know, put my hands to the pump. It's admirable. And I'm not saying that there's never a time to do that. But I see it far too often being the solution, when actually the real learning and the real personal growth is going to be, let's get our head around the plans. Let's make sure we're only doing stuff that's aligned. Let's get ourselves in a place where we can actually communicate with our peers and with the board or investors about what we need to get the job done.
Yeah, I think it's that transition between getting the thing done right and getting the right thing done. And that shift of mindset from building the software in the right way to building the right software. And that is a difficult transition for somebody who's been in the trenches, hacking away at code for 2 years, which is the reason why the startup is successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I sometimes liken it to that mindset. Like, you ever wonder why you somehow are able to, like, you might struggle to do like an assignment at home, and when you're at uni and you're trying to plug through, it takes ages trying to get your focus there. But the moment you walk into an exam hall, suddenly you can just smash out something that might have taken you a week otherwise. I sometimes think about, like, my job is to try and get people into that exam mode mindset as often as possible. And that comes only with clarity, extreme clarity on what it is that needs to be done and the timeliness in which it needs to be done. And that all comes back to planning and communication.
Yeah. And Mary's got a great point here. Leave tech leadership out of strategy conversations at your own risk. Good ones will not stick around. I think that's a great point. If you're hiring somebody who is a truly effective technology executive, they're going to want to be involved in those discussions because they're the things that make them effective. You can't remove the tech leader from those discussions and expect them to continue being effective.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with this. I think thankfully it's becoming less common. This was like when I was first starting out, which is like kind of revealing my age a bit. But even in the early 2000s, there was very much a sense that IT, as it was then called within most businesses, was like a junior partner to the executive team, even if they had a C-level in charge of it.
And often reported to the CFO.
Yeah, exactly.
Which really tells you straight away where their minds were.
Exactly. Like, this stuff's expensive, make the CFO responsible. I think that's less common now. And I would say the onus is far more on, even if you've got somebody who is a good technologist, it doesn't then follow that they are a good technology executive. And I think the far more likely scenario, the far more common scenario I see around the place is that it's kind of the CTOs to lose. So if they can't start talking in a language and making themselves understood in a way that the other executives can understand, then that's the thing that will shut them out of that conversation, not through any sort of lack of willingness on their part. If I had $1 for every CEO that I've talked to that said, like, I just wish I had a CTO that could explain to me how what they need, I'd get it to them. I'd probably have at least $25. But like, it's surprisingly common.
Yeah, I think the thing I hear a lot, which makes me insanely angry, is business, non-tech executives coming to me and saying, "Hey, I want you to teach me to understand tech so I can speak to our CTO." I'm like, no, that's the wrong problem. Like, I want to speak to your CTO so that they can speak to you. That's the actual problem to solve. I mean, yes, you can do well and you will help your business by understanding a little bit more about tech. I'm never going to say to people they shouldn't understand more about technology. But the real underlying problem is not that you don't understand tech, it's that your tech doesn't know how to talk business.
Yeah, I think so. And we've sort of danced around this, but sort of bringing it back to something practically that, what do I mean when I say learn to talk business? It's not a mystery thing, right? But it requires leaning into something that you might sort of feel like, oh, isn't that somebody else's job? Since I learned this, there hasn't been a single job that I've taken on where I don't maintain basically my own spreadsheet that has all of my expenses. And I'm not talking about my personal expenses. Like I've got a register of all of the SaaS products that we use, all of the hosting, like every single cost, including my staff costs. And I have basically a budget and cash flow model built out that I use, because when you get asked a question by the executive team, okay, well, how much is that, going to cost? Like if you're saying, look, I think we need another team. The amount of trust that you can gain in 2 seconds by just coming back and saying, every new team that we put on costs us X.
Yeah.
Like straight away, you're in a different category. It's like, oh, okay, cool. And
because that's the first question they're thinking of, and you've provided
right.
the answer, and you've proven that you're thinking about it in that way.
Right. And then when they, the other thing would be is like, you've got some kind of view on your capacity in a very real way. So like, have a sense of, it's not just the product manager's job to sort of maintain a register of like what the capacity is for a project, but like, I'm thinking across the team, it's like, well, if I know that I've got, I've got to be running like 3 sprints. Well, then I've got 3 teams across those. How many, how many days work have I got across those? Or, how many sprints can I run concurrently or whatever? It then sort of comes back to when somebody asks, and again, I'm picking on the CEO, but it's usually the CEO who's being, totally unreasonable. But they might say, look, I've just read this article or this book, or I've, watched this thing on YouTube, and like, we really need to be doing X. And what I love to do is I love to pull up the roadmap and go, okay, cool, let's talk about that. It sounds important. Let's look at what we've got on. And my roadmap is laid out with like, these are the things that we're doing, and sort of laid out, like Gantt charts kind of went out of vogue with Scrum, but I think they're very, very useful at a roadmap level. And it's like, well, okay, so for the next 2 sprints, this team's working on this, and this team's working on this for 1 sprint, blah, blah, blah. Here's what we've already got laid out in the schedule. What do you want to move around? And sometimes they'll go, oh, no, we can't possibly change any of that. And I'll go, okay, cool. So we're hiring an extra team. Oh, yeah. Oh, no, I don't think so. Okay, so we're getting in some contractors to do this next. How much is that going to cost? Well, a team of contractors is going to cost us X. Earliest they can start is a month from now. That's the soonest we can get this done. Suddenly, he is looking at the same, or she is looking at the same dilemma that you are. And this isn't what is not being communicated more often than not. Most CTOs just show up and like, you just see the little vein in their neck start to pulse, and like, and you watch them sweat, and they're like, don't you, and the heart rate's going, and they're like, don't you know how much we've got on already, and how much like I'm already working to try and help you reach this thing, like we couldn't possibly. And that's where the conversation, like they just they reflect problems back to the CEO, rather than sort of inviting them into and creating a shared mental model and saying, look, there might be a way to get this done. We're just going to have to decide, what's the lesser of the evils that we want to accept here. They then share your problem. It's not a problem. They don't have a problem with you. They might have a problem with the situation, but you've got the ability to make those decisions. You can't do that if you don't have that visibility, and if you don't have that grasp on things like your team's capacity and the numbers.
Yeah, there's a great thing in improv, which is yes and. What they teach you when you do improv training is you never ever respond with no. You always, if you're ever unsure what to respond with, you respond with yes and that's the way to kind of approach those discussions that I teach. Is yes, we can do that, and here's the consequences. You're always kind of highlighting what the consequences is. I think this is another great example of that shift between breadth and depth as you go up the hierarchy in an organization, because the CEO is looking at it through an incredibly broad but not very deep understanding of the whole business, because again, human brains, time in the week, they can't possibly understand all of that. And your job as the technology executive is to have a deeper level understanding of what's going on with technology, and that's the bridge you're trying to cross in that discussion. Is you're trying to bring awareness of some of that depth of the consequences to somebody who's very, very broad in their thinking.
100%, and I think it comes back to that comment you made right at the beginning of this this topic, which was, when the CEO comes to you and says, "I want to learn a bit more about tech," what that's an indication of is actually a failure of the CTO to keep the conversation at a certain level, and so the empathic, probably in this case, CEO is trying to understand more. But if they're going into that depth, I think that means that you haven't communicated effectively, because now they're all up in your business and you thought you had problems before.
Yeah. 100%. So totally aware. This has gone really, really quick. I can't believe we're at 50 minutes already. This just always surprises me every single time. We can't have a live stream in 2025 without touching on the two letters A and I. So tell me, Dave, like what are you doing right now with AI to kind of help your job as a leader? What do you think people should do, should avoid? Just kind of talk about how AI can help or hinder us as technology leaders.
Yeah, it's you're absolutely right. 2025 will be the year of AI questions. Look, I think deservedly so. Something that I'm finding is a big dichotomy. It's kind of confusing to me, is that if you look at the State of AI report, which I think Anthropic put out at the beginning of the year, the penetration of AI in the workplace is like, it's like 65-66% or something like that for software or IT. The next nearest industry is marketing, and it's like at 4.5% or something. It's like the gap is huge, and so it's like, oh, okay, engineering teams, yeah, they've adopted AI, but you dig a bit deeper, and it's like, well, actually, it's true to the extent where they might be using ChatGPT, or they might be using Copilot or whatever. But there's a real fear, and I think it's a natural one, around things like Claude Code or Cursor's agent, Windsurf. Everyone's bringing in agentic models. There's things like Lovable, where you can just sort of vibe code your way to the way to freedom, and you can sense in teams there is a real resistance to this sort of thing. And you're also seeing reports of very heavy-handed approaches where companies are sort of getting fed up, and they're just like, you will use this is a mandate. And I think that's a mistake as well. Coercion never works out in the long term. I think for me, it's about working with teams and sort of explaining to them. I think tools like Claude Code, I use that personally to do a bunch of things, lend a hand to the team. It's about it's a lever, but it's one where you have to teach your team, okay, this shouldn't be a threat to your job, but it's essential that you're going to learn how to use these things in order to stay relevant. So our job together is to figure out what that looks like. And so really focused on things like code reviews, because we can't trust all the code. It's fantastic, but just like a really knowledgeable junior, you wouldn't just go and hit merge on that straight away. You've got to look at it and see if it's good. There's plenty of funny Reddit threads about people who vibe coded a solution, and within 10 minutes it's been hacked within inches of its existence.
Yep.
Yeah, And so I think that's a big thing, big focus on reading, and I think code comprehension actually has to improve dramatically for every member of the team, because there's just going to be more of it being produced. Yeah, I think as well, just like a lot of surprising things where you're just doing manual stuff where we're like transforming things between different representations of data or whatever. I'm saying to all my teams as well, most startups tend to be on Google Workspaces, and they just made a change a little while ago. I think it was about 2 months ago, where Gemini is now included within Google Workspace, and it's crazy. Like almost every company I'm working with, they'll have like ChatGPT subscriptions, and I'm like, why are we still doing this? Gemini is actually beating it in all the benchmarks, and you have it for free. And I'm just saying to people, like, you probably should be thinking to yourself when you get a new task and you're kind of not sure how to approach it, or like, okay, how do I approach this from an angle where, like, could AI get this done faster? Or could part of this be done better by the AI tools we've got? Other than that, I'm not incredibly prescriptive. I think I just want to make sure as well, like, you got to read those terms of service. You don't want to be giving away the company's IP. And I think a blanket rule I would say is you are not allowed to use free AI tools. Because if it's free, you are the product, you have no protections, you are giving away the company's IP.
Yeah, I think that's just a really great general rule. Like any product at all that's free, you're actually the product, not the software, and especially true in AI because they just scrape that data. I think that analogy of a junior engineer is something you can take to any place that you're using AI. So I often will use AI to generate text for me for various things. And I don't just take that text and use it. It's like, cool. It's a first point of discussion. It's like I've asked a junior to write code. I've asked a junior to kind of think about something and put it together into text. Like it's a good verbal kind of starting point. But one of the challenges I found with it is the more I use AI earlier in the process, the less my unique perspective shows up. So, in the early days of AI, I tried using AI to generate blog posts. And what I found was the blog posts were fine, but they weren't like me. They didn't have that spark that was the reason why people read my blog. And I'm waiting for that to change, but it's every 6 months or so I try it and it's still the same. It's like you've taken an average of all the stuff on the internet, and the average of anything is not particularly compelling.
I love this. Yeah, like if there was a word that describes stuff that comes out of AI, it's like it's mid.
Yeah.
And I think if you don't want to be mid, like don't let it do 100% of the work.
Yeah, exactly. I think there is a huge shift that's going to happen in our industry, and I think especially in the technology industry, we're going to be massively disrupted. But the best way you can prepare yourself for that is to learn how to use the tools effectively. The people that can use the tools effectively are going to lose their jobs last.
Yeah, and I think that's it. Like, we can either stick our heads in the sand or we can find out how to embrace it. I was having a conversation with my kids around the dinner table. My kids are getting a bit older now. Like my son's in year 7, and he was like, I've started learning to code at school, but do I need, like, is this going to be a job? Like, is AI going to take this away? And I was reminded of, like, we went to this medieval fair a couple of years ago, and he got to play around with like an old loom. And I was like, remember that thing that you played around with, right? Well, every village used to have one of these things, and there'd be a handful of people that were all invested in producing clothes for the village. And like all of a sudden, that was all being done in a factory somewhere that was producing tons of stuff in the time it would have taken them to produce, just one garment at a much higher quality. And all of those people lost their jobs, and there was some pain in the middle of that. But we're not still talking about how, those poor loom workers, like they just work in different ways now. And I think just because we can't imagine what that looks like today doesn't mean that there isn't something. We'd literally be flying in the face of, thousands of years of human development to say that we've literally invented the thing that means that none of us have to do anything ever again.
Yeah. And again, in this transition point, society will be fine, but in this transition point, you as an individual will do the best by your career by becoming knowledgeable about this stuff and learning how to use it effectively while we're in this transition point.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. We have reached the top end of the hour, which is crazy talk, but that is exactly where we are. Thank you very much, Dave, for joining me on this. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been all over the place in the best possible way.
Thank you. No, it's really great to be here.
Yeah, no, I definitely going to have you back. So just to let you folks at home know, the next live stream is going to be with Shirley Ha in just over a month's time. And we're going to talk about something that we're actually discussing in this live stream, which is how to get your boss to listen to your ideas. This is, all about this concept of, we've got to learn as technology leaders how to communicate effectively to our peers and our bosses, and get them to understand us as opposed to expecting them to put the legwork in to learn our language and learn how to speak to us. So I'm super looking forward to that conversation. What I'm doing is over the next few months, I'm doing a bunch of workshops around Australia and New Zealand. So if you're watching from Australia or New Zealand, please have a look at these. These are, workshops on the introduction to technology leadership. So a lot of the stuff that we've talked about here, where we're, talking about what it means to be a technology leader, how we as technology leaders kind of make that transition from being an excellent technologist to a leader of people. I'm doing those in Auckland, Wellington, Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, all around ANZ. And if you want to know about that, there's the first QR code there. If you want to just follow me, I've got a newsletter where I post occasionally. This is always the best place to find out where I am, what I'm doing, and who I'm speaking to, which is the second QR code. Dave, anything you want to share with the folks at home?
Yeah, so I've just got I'm actually developing a course for CTOs at the moment, and I'd love to know your thoughts on what you'd like to see in that course. I've shared the link with you, Andrew, but I'm not logged into the comments, so if you can share that.
I've posted that.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'd love your input on that, just because I think that'll make it even better than what I've got in mind. If it incorporates things that you want to hear. So appreciate that.
They're the best training courses. Yeah. There's the real problems that people are really having and the best way to do it.
Exactly.
Awesome. We are at time. We are over time. So thank you once again, Dave. Thank you everybody for watching, and we will see you next time on Tech Leaders Launchpad live streams. See you later.
Thanks, Andrew.